Noon. My name is Amanda Chu, and I'm with Energetics Incorporated, supporting the Department of Energy's Better Buildings Neighborhood Program. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to today's webinar. In today's presentation, we'll be covering the Better Buildings Summary of Reported Data. And with us today is Dale Hoffmeyer with DOE. He is the Reporting and Evaluation Lead for the Better Buildings Neighborhood Program, and he will be sharing data reported by Better Buildings Partners from 2010 through the fall of 2013. So before we get started, let's go over a few logistical items. And for that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Sargon.
Thanks, Amanda. Before we get started, like I said, just wanted to touch on a few things so you're aware. First of all participant phone lines have been put on universal mute to prevent background noise during the presentation. Also, if you haven't done so already, and if you're using a telephone line to join us, we encourage you to enter your 2- or 3-digit audio PIN. Here's a screenshot of what that might look like. You can find your audio PIN in the control panel box on the right-hand side of your screen, typically. And to enter that PIN, you press pound, the 2- or 3-digit number, and then pound again, right into your telephone keypad. And we ask you to do that so that we can unmute your line if you have any questions during the Q&A period. If you're listening to the presentation through your computer speakers, however, we'll not be able to unmute you to ask questions orally during that Q&A period. On that topic, we'll be addressing questions primarily at the end of today's presentation, although Dale might invite some questions midway through. And during that time, you can virtually raise your hand by clicking the blue circle button with a hand in the control panel, as indicated here, and we can unmute you. Alternatively, you can also type in a question at any point during the webinar into the questions box, also part of that control panel, and we can get to those as they come in. Lastly, wanted to mention that today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online afterwards. So that covers it for the logistical items, and now I'll turn it back over to Amanda.
Great, thank you. And you'll receive an email once the presentation is live on the website, so look forward to that soon.
The Better Buildings Neighborhood Program, for those of you who may not be aware. This was kicked off back in 2010. It was originally called Retrofit Ramp Up, and there was a funding opportunity announcement issued, primarily funded with Recovery Act funding, as well as some later funding opportunity announcement used some funding from FY 2010. But in both cases, the purpose was to encourage energy efficiency program innovation, and the total amount was about a little over $500 million in grants that were then issued as a result of that funding opportunity announcement. And those started to be awarded in 2010 through the end of 2010. So they didn't all start at the same time, but started. So the program period, at least most of the data we'll be talking about, was about 2.5 years to 3 years, depending upon when the grants started. And there were a number of reasons for doing this, like I mentioned, encouraging energy efficiency program innovation. This was not just in one area, but in rural, urban, suburban, as well as all building sectors, including residential, multifamily, single-family, commercial, and even agricultural and industrial. So recipients were encouraged to try to capitalize on economies of scale and industry partnerships and looking towards sustainability beyond the grant period. So those are some of the goals of the grant. And we also, the purpose was to try to find out what was effective and replicable. So a little background on the grant program. This map shows where recipients' locations were around the country. As I mentioned, there were 41 actual grant recipients. Most of them were what we call energy efficiency conservation block grants, and those were funded with the Recovery Act. And then there were about 7 that were state energy program grants. Those were smaller amounts, and those were not Recovery Act funded. So there are a little bit some differences between those two groups of grantees. There are, like I mentioned, 41 grantees, but there's a lot more dots on this map. One example is in the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance was a recipient, and they headed up a Southeast consortium, which included about 13 sub-grantees in 13 different communities, including Virgin Islands. In LA County, they also had several sub-grantees. I think there were about 9. Boulder County, Colorado, had some sub-grantees in Denver, as well as Garfield County. So there may have been 41 grantees, but there were definitely many more programs than that in more communities, as well as many of the grantees did not only have a residential or just a commercial. Some of them had both programs, or even programs that addressed both residential, multifamily, single-family, and commercial. So quite a bit of diversity across the grantees. This slide just provides a high-level synopsis of the Better Buildings goals and accomplishments. This information on the accomplishments is through the end of December 2013. This is an exception to what is presented in the rest of the presentation. The rest is the data is through September 30th, 2013. But through the end of December 2013, achieved about over 100,000 homes were upgraded, as well as about 3,800 commercial buildings. We did some analysis, and based on the data that was reported, estimated some average energy savings for homes on the order of greater than 20%. So that was positive, seeing that. Now that was estimated savings and estimated annual savings. And then total energy savings for consumers, an estimate based on what was reported is about 74 million annual gross estimated savings. And grantees were encouraged to leverage other funding sources, other resources. Could be state, local, could be utility funding, it could be other federal funding. And what we saw, what was based on what was reported, about over 70 million in non-BBMP expenditures. That includes the building owner contributions as well. And there was another way that grantees leveraged other sources of capital, and that included many of them set up loan loss reserves, which leveraged private capital that was available to lend for building upgrades. And so we estimate about 40 million was leveraged there as well. And much of that will continue. Into the future, because many of these loan funds will continue beyond today. So on our last 2 items, we also wanted to see if we could reduce program delivery costs by 20% or more, and we're completing some additional analysis on that. Hopefully that will all turn out as we expect. And then lastly, the Recovery Act was really trying to create a lot of jobs, and so there were some goals there for jobs, and the estimate at the bottom of over 4,000 person years was an estimate from the evaluation, a preliminary evaluation that was completed in June 2012. So we hope that we're on track to meeting our goal, and we'll see when the final comes out. So those are just some high-level accomplishments. So why don't we move on to the summary of what was reported and a little details about about data that was reported. So first I want to talk about why we collect data, or why we collected data, lots of data. And there's a statement here at the top. I think we just want to see that there's more data is really needed to better understand the effectiveness of upgrade strategies, and we really need kind of empirical data supporting effective strategies. So that's what a lot of people in our community are asking for and looking for, and so trying to pull that information together. There are three reasons why we were really trying to collect data. The first, of course, is needing to monitor the grantee progress. So that was a primary reason. A secondary reason is, I mentioned, there is a independent evaluation of the Better Buildings Neighborhood Program, so needing data in order to complete that. And then third, of course, the information is valuable to researchers, program administrators, and hopefully many of you in the audience today are in that group and are interested in this data to understand what kind of strategies are working and what's effective, and interested in seeing some data to support that. So that's why we collect data, but how was the data collected? The data was collected from the grantees. We had a standardized reporting form that we used for collecting data from grantees, and we asked them to report quarterly. However, I do want to make a point here that the data collection was unique for each grantee. The original funding opportunity announcement was issued before the data collection requirements, so many of the grantees had their own data collection efforts in place, either from existing programs or if they had launched before the requirements came out, they had developed their own system. So there was some challenges in having that information be consistently reported to DOE, although we provided a standardized form in order to do that. There were obviously some challenges there. Some things that we really learned through this effort is that these were real-world programs. They were not randomized controlled trials, although that would be really nice to have. That's not exactly what we had. These were real-world programs, people trying different things, lots of different approaches, and trying to help consumers, homeowners, and others in the marketplace retrofit homes. There are a couple other things that we learned. One, it did seem that we underestimated the diversity of many of the strategies being tested by grantees. We did have 41 grantees, but there were many sub-grantees and sub-programs under that. So I think we underestimated a little bit the diversity of what was going to be tested by grantees. As well, the data collection process and systems were a little bit delayed, and then we also underestimated some of the data quality challenges we would face. So we did have a Excel reporting template that was used that grantees would report in a standardized way. We also had an XML data transfer web service established. Only a few grantees used the XML. Most used the Excel reporting template. And if you're interested in seeing what that reporting template looks like, just send me an email. I'm happy to send it to you. So that's a little bit about how the data was collected. So what kind of data was collected? So these two lists here are two kinds of data that was collected, and this is not the only information that was collected by DOE or was reported by the grantees. This is just actually one report, which I referred to in the previous slide. An Excel reporting template was used for what we call the program report quarterly, and it asked for information about programmatic information, or at a grantee level, what was the number obligations, amount of grant spending, number of hours worked, individuals trained and certified, audits completed, energy saved, that kind of information at a program level or at the grantee level. So we were asking for that on a quarterly basis. And then we also asked them to report actual individual projects. Every project that was completed, we wanted to see information, detailed information about all of those projects. And there was some basic information, general information, zip code, type of building, as well as details about the building, energy provider, about the audit, the upgrade date, the contractor, invoice cost, installed measures, estimated savings, that type of thing. So there were actually two kinds of data that was being reported, and this is just for one report. Grantees were required to submit a couple different kinds of reports quarterly. They had a progress report and spend plan. They had a Recovery Act report, which was required if their grant was funded through the Recovery Act. There was very specific information that was required to be reported under the Recovery Act. So that was also another report that they were required to file. So this is just one of the reports, but one of the main sources of detailed information that we were able to collect. So we collected lots of data, but unfortunately it's not necessarily 100% reliable, and there's three potential types of errors in the data that we were able to collect. And this is very common in any kind of data collection effort, that you're going to face these kinds of errors. First, you have data that's not reported, that's not available or not applicable, and it's sometimes puzzling why, if there's just a blank, you don't actually know the reason why, you just know that it's not there. You also have incorrect responses, and these are not always easy to identify, but an incorrect response is typically the information that was requested was not understood. There may have been some confusion about definitions, or different definitions or different ways people looked at the information that was being requested. So that's definitely a possibility. We did run into that at times, and if we were able to identify it, we tried to follow up with grantees and correct that, but there are definitely those types of situations. And then finally, we also saw processing errors. So the information was being reported to DOE, and then we would process these reports, which would extract the data from the reporting template, tabulate it, and load it into a database. And there could be errors introduced in that process. Ideally, that's not what you don't want that to happen, but unfortunately, it is a reality in any kind of data processing system. So we did run into that at times and had to try to correct those errors, and but it's always possible that there are some that we were not able to identify. So looking at the first of those, non-response, we did run a report every quarter. We sent this kind of information, similar in this graph, to grantees about data completeness. And we got lots of data, but it was not always 100% complete. So if you look at towards the bottom, estimated annual cost savings, about 88% of the projects that were reported had an estimated cost savings. Energy cost savings, or 83% had up the invoice cost. So on 83% of the projects that were reported, we had that information. At the top, you see when we were asking for energy consumption data, we only got about 6% of the projects that were reported where we were able to obtain energy consumption data that was 12 months before the upgrade and 12 months after the upgrade. There are a number of reasons why that was challenging. Very common reasons that many of you are probably aware of, but one, in the Northeast, a lot of homes and buildings may use bulk fuels, like heating oil or propane, and that's really challenging to collect that kind of information, a very diverse group of retailers. So a lot of the programs in the Northeast were not able to provide that kind of information. We did find some grantees had challenges just getting electric and natural gas information as well from utilities. Some of them had very good relationships and others not as well. So there were challenges there. And then another reason why we had some challenges is if a project was completed in July of 2013 or June of 2013, it wouldn't be until today that we would actually be able to obtain that 12 months post-energy consumption data for those homes, for that home or building that was upgraded last year. So most of these grants were starting to close at the end of 2013 or were pretty much at the end of their funding, and their obligations as far as providing that information was coming to an end. So a lot of the projects towards the end of the period, we were not able to get the full 12 months of data. So couple of reasons why we had some challenges there. So that's a little bit about the data that was collected and why we collected it. But what you're, I'm sure, all interested in on the call, hopefully, is what data will be available. I'm sure you're very interested in this. And there's a couple different sources. The first is the Better Buildings Neighborhood Program Independent Evaluations. And on the next slide, I'll talk about that and where you can get that information. The second is the recovery.gov, and this is where you can find any information about the Recovery Act projects. So Better Buildings, at least some of the grantees were funded through Recovery Act, and they were required to report information on their to this website, federalreporting.gov, and then all of that information ended up on recovery.gov, which is still available. And that's job information, expenditures by recipients of grantees and vendors. And if you're interested in that, you can go to the website and download it, but you'll end up having to download a file that includes every project for the whole country, and then you'll have to filter out for just the grantees. So I've already done that, and if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to send that file to you, which just includes the Better Buildings grantee, but it's the recovery.gov data. The third item on the list here is the Better Buildings summary of reported data, and so we're going to talk about that today, and that is been posted on the Better Buildings website. So that is available, and this is a summary over what was reported by all the grantees. There will eventually be a report for each grantee. Those are not available just yet. Those will be available in the coming months. We will be updating the profile pages, each grantee's profile page on the Better Buildings website through July, August, and September. And so when those pages are updated, we will be including this information. So that includes all the grantees. The next bullet is building upgrade data. We do plan to release some building upgrade data that was reported. We do have an obligation to protect privacy, so we have to anonymize these records, and so that it's not possible to identify individuals. So we're going through that process right now, and working through trying to clean up some errors we've identified, and so it's taking a little bit longer than we had anticipated. But we're working on that, and eventually we will be releasing some information. It will primarily just be the single-family records, not all the commercial and other and multifamily records, because there's a lot fewer of those projects in the database. And last but not least is the grantees' final technical report. So the recipients of these grants, they were all required to submit a final technical report, which would talk about the results, strategies they used, lessons learned, and next steps. And those are available. Some of those are already available, and those that are not are being finalized and will be available. And I have a slide about where you can get that information. And in addition to this, there are some additional analysis work being done by the National Renewable Energy Lab. They're looking at energy upgrade, the upgrade measures that were performed, as well as energy savings, looking at the actual consumption data compared to estimates. So they're doing some analysis on that right now, and when that's available, we could probably have them present some of that. And then we also have LBNL, Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, doing some analysis as well on some of the information, trying to tease out some lessons and on the costs of programs. So when that's available too, hopefully we'll be able to share that. So I mentioned the Better Buildings independent evaluations. This is a primary source that you'd be interested in. There is a preliminary process and market evaluation that was completed in 2013 and a preliminary energy savings impact evaluation. So those are both available at the website listed below at the bottom of the slide. They are working right now. The team, evaluation team, which is being headed up by Research into Action. It includes Nexent, Evergreen Economics, and NMR Group. And this is oversawn at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and this was all Recovery Act funded evaluation. So they're working on the final process and market evaluation and the final energy savings impact evaluation right now. Hopefully have that out later this year and in early 2015. In addition to the evaluation, we've asked them some additional research questions because they're analyzing a lot of the data. They have the actual data that was reported, and they have a lot of information about each of the programs, so a lot of contextual information. So we've asked them to do some additional analysis looking at effective strategies regarding incentives, assessments, and assessment approaches, energy assessments, free versus full price versus, simple audit, those types of things, and looking at marketing, contractor engagement, and implementation and administration. So we have a number of other research questions that they're going to be looking into. I mentioned the grantee's final technical report. The website at the bottom is where you can find those. This is the Office of Scientific and Technical Information website, and the ones that are available right now are on that website. You can see the Southeast Consortium report there on the slide, and others like that will be available. So this is the grantee's story. This is them telling their story about what was accomplished. Eventually, we will have links on the profile pages that link to these, but if you want to find a report, I would suggest in the search on this page you would type in Better Buildings Neighborhood Program or the grantee name, and you should be able to find it. I mentioned we would be releasing some information at the grantee level. Eventually, this will be posted on the Better Buildings Neighborhood website on the profile pages, and this is an example of some of that information. This is what we call the grantee dashboard file, and it's just an Excel file, and each row shows a quarter and what was reported in the different columns for outlays, which is spending basically, and then invoice cost of the upgrades, number of audits, number of upgrades, total hours worked, total energy savings, so forth. So just basic information that was reported by grantees. So we will have those available eventually. Not available just yet, but they will be. So the main part of today's presentation I want to talk about is the summary of reported data. And this, again, was reported by the Better Buildings partners from 2010 through 2013, or September 30th, 2013. And just to reiterate, this is not an evaluation of the Better Buildings program. This report just is a summary of what was reported. There is an evaluation we just talked about. This is also not the grantee's final technical report. That's another document, and I just showed you where you can get that information. So just trying to clarify, there's a couple different sources here. And also, as I mentioned, as they are completed, there will be grantee summaries. So it's similar information, but at the grantee level, and those will be available on the Better Buildings website when it gets updated. And that will happen the end of July through September is when that information will be updated on the website. So a little bit about the summary of reported data report. This is just about the structure. So what we're going to talk about today, the summary of reported data, is over all of the grantees. So it's a summary of what all the grantees reported. And so I like to call it the executive summary to differentiate it from each of the grantee summaries. And what's available today is that executive summary report, and it's called the Better Buildings Summary of Reported Data is the title. So that is available. So the way that the report is structured is it has a consistent structure with what the grantee summaries will look like. So it has a synopsis on funding, program design, driving demand, financing, workforce, energy savings. It's not detailed. If you want detailed information about that, your best source is the grantee's final technical report. But it provides a synopsis, and so that's sort of the story, background story, and then consistent graphs and tables, and that's the data to go along with that story. So let's just take a look at some of what is in the, here we go. So the first graph in there talks about what is the cost. So this graph shows the Better Building spending by quarter. So this is total spending across all the grantees, and that's the blue area. Hopefully it's blue on your screen, but that's on the bottom, on the area graph, it's the bottom color. And so that's the Better Building spending. At the end of September, by September 30th, 2013, all of the funding had not been spent. The dashed blue line shows what the total award amount is. There were some grantees that were given extensions and are still, we're just still finishing up work in the last quarter of this year, in 2014. So it had not, the total funding amount had not all been spent by the end of September 2013. The orange area under the graph is other federal expenditures. It could be another DOE grant or HUD funding or some other federal source. The green area in the graph is non-federal expenditures. That includes state, local, as well as building owner contribution. So that's what's represented there. And then there's a black line that's across the graph as well, superimposed on top of this, which is what was reported as invoice cost of all of the upgrades. So this is the sum of the invoice costs reported for all upgrade projects. Now, a couple things to note on that invoice cost. Only 83% of the projects reported had that information, so I expect that that value is underreported. It's probably more than that. And the green area as well, it does appear that some grantees may have underreported the non-federal expenditures or didn't include the building owner contribution in that green bar. So that's probably higher as well than what is been reported. So that expenditure graph is in the funding synopsis section. Assessments and upgrades is in the section on driving demand and what types of strategies that they took. So we were looking at some outputs here, and this is just number of upgrades, number of assessments, and then total energy savings superimposed on the back in the gray area graph. So the number of upgrades and assessments here on the graph is the total across all sectors. I would throw in a little bit of caution. Sometimes people like to just take the number of assessments and divide by the number of upgrades to get an audit to retrofit conversion rate. And you know, that might seem like it makes a lot of sense. When you actually look at some of the grantee data, you'll see that some grantees, the upgrades are almost identical or only a little fewer than the number of assessments. And it's not that they, maybe they have a 100% conversion rate, but actually it's more likely that the way they've designed their program, that only the assessments that were reported were the assessments that have actually resulted in upgrades. So, it may seem that that's an appropriate thing to do, but you have to be a little bit careful about the numbers in doing that. So, just a little caution there. For some programs, they probably did have as many assessments reported as that occurred, and others may have been the way the program design was set up that you know, dividing one number by the other may not tell you what you think. So assessments and upgrades, and then a big emphasis in Better Buildings program by a lot of grantees was in financing, and they made a lot of investments in revolving loan funds, loan loss reserves, as well as interest rate buy-down programs. And so we wanted to see what was the total investment. So this table shows what the total investment across all the grantees in revolving loan funds, both commercial and residential, loan loss reserves, as well as interest rate buy-down. About 30% of the total award amount, so that's the $508 million, about 30% of that went to these types of investments to leverage financing or provide financing. And then at the bottom of that section on financing investments, we also have total capital. And this is private and non-BBMP. So this does not include the Better Buildings funds that were used to set up a revolving loan fund. This is primarily if a grantee set up a loan loss reserve and they use that loan loss reserve to leverage private capital that would be lent for building upgrades. So that's what that number represents. It's an estimate. So it seemed like it changed a lot, and they're dependent upon the grantee, but that's sort of an estimate of what, how much private capital or other than Better Buildings funds was leveraged using loan loss reserves and other approaches. And then at the bottom of the graph, we have some of the results as far as what was loaned out, number of loans, and average loan amount. I do have a couple other graphs later on where we'll get into more details about financing results. And in the summary of reported data report, this last table is on estimated energy savings. There's actually two tables here, and let me explain what the difference is. The first table at the top is the estimated annual energy savings that was reported by grantees. It's the sum across all the quarters of what they reported. And this is at the grantee level, so total annual energy savings reported by the grantees over that period of time. Below that is a table that is based on the number of projects that were reported. So the table below is the sum of what was reported for each project as far as annual estimated energy savings. So there's a little bit of difference between the two, but it is what we would expect, primarily because some projects, there may have been information missing, and that might be why there's a little bit of a difference, but they're not that far off. So it isn't necessarily what we wouldn't expect. The other reason is at the beginning of the grant period, we asked grantees to only report projects that saved 15% or more. And so it may be that they are only reporting those projects, and that some projects were completed that saved less than that. And they reported the savings in their program total, but they didn't report the actual project, so we don't have that project data. So later in the grant, we allowed grantees to do what we called a portfolio average, and so they could report all the projects that were completed, regardless of the percentage, as long as the portfolio average was less than 15%. I'm sorry, was greater than 15%. So, so there are some reasons why those numbers are different. So just clarifying what those two tables are for. So that's a that's an overview of what the summary of reported data includes. Before we go on a little bit into the rest of the presentation, which will get into some details about financing volume by state, loan amount, upgrade cost, and energy savings, why don't we pause here and see if there are any questions that I could answer just briefly, any clarifying questions, and then we can continue on and get into some of the more detail that you might be interested in.
Thanks, Dale. So in the interest of time, we have one question, and we'll save the remainder for the end of your presentation, if you don't mind. So one question is, why is the end date for data September 30th, 2013? What's the significance of that?
It's a good question. There are a couple. Originally, the grants were supposed to end on September 30th, 2013. And so we were sort of working towards that and kind of wrapping things up and kind of bringing things to a close. And so that's part of the reason why. The other is we sort of, many of the grantees did get extensions. Some of them did end around that time, but some of them did get extensions as well and have been continuing over the last several months to try to wrap things up. So we did have to make some decisions about, hey, we need to kind of close things off and wrap up some data. There is additional reporting that has happened beyond September 30th. We do have additional information. We just haven't consolidated it into all of the information that we've pulled together here. And part of that is we just needed to kind of take the data set that we had, make sure it was as close as we could get to what seemed to be what was correct, and be able to pass that on to the evaluation team so that they can do their evaluation. And if we had the extensions, it meant we were going to have to extend everything, other contracts and so on and so forth, related to managing of the data, and some of those were things we just couldn't do. So we do have additional information about, number of projects that were reported through the end of the grant period or through the last couple quarters, but in order to kind of pull together some summaries, we just kind of said, okay, we need to kind of tie things up here at the end of September and try to make sure that at least we have this sound, and then we can always come back and add the other information at a later date. So.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so let's jump into the next section on some additional summaries. This information is not in the summary of reported data, but it's some additional information we pulled together, and it's really looking more at the project data, not the program data, but total project data that was reported. There's some interesting information here, and I hope you find it interesting as well. But I know that a lot of what we're interested in is lessons learned, and that really is doing analysis, not specifically at the project level, but really at the program level, looking at what approaches were tried and then what were their outputs. So there is going to be some additional analysis to kind of tease out some of those, but I don't have additional information on that today, just mostly able to present some of what was reported. Let's see if I can get the slides to go forward. So one of the things that people ask about is what was the financing volume by state, and so we do have a map that kind of breaks that out to show where there was more financing used than others, so which states had the most volume, and some statistics at the top about average loan amount and the total amount loaned. So a little information there that might be of interest. And then we want to talk a little bit about loan amount. So looking at financing and loan amount, and actually, Amanda, I think we have a polling question for people to see what people on our audience, what they think might have been the average loan amount for, well, let's be specific, single-family homes.
Right. So, folks, you should be able to see the poll on your screen now. So please choose an option for what you think the average loan amount for a single-family home upgrade was. So we'll keep the poll open for another couple seconds. Okay. And let's see what the results are. So we had about 45% of folks think it was around the $10,000 range, 23% thinking the $9,000, 12,000 around 5%, and 27% thinking it falls around the $8,000 range. So Dale, what's the answer?
Okay, so we see what the answer is here. So what we did here, and I have a number of graphs here where we looked at the actual project data, and what I'm showing you is a histogram that shows number of upgrades, sort of the frequency of a certain loan amount in this case. And so we have bins that are about $1,000. So if the loan amount fit within that, we have a bin for it. So this is the histogram showing loan amount. This is specifically just single-family homes through our reporting period 2010 to September 30th, 2013. And then we do have some statistics in a box at the right showing the mean, which is for across all of the grantees, it was about 10,000. To be specific, 191. It's not that. We don't need to be that specific. There's a number of reasons why I can talk about, but in the median tend to be about 9,000. So actually, what's the right answer may depend, because this is for the whole, all of the projects that were reported with a loan. But we're going to look at a few other graphs that show by region. And it also kind of depends, what are you most interested in, that mean or the median? So here we have this graph just to give you some idea of what the data looks like. And there are a few things to mention about the graph, and this applies also in the case with some of the other graphs I'm going to show you. And one of those is you'll see a couple spikes here in this histogram, one at 15,000, one at 20,000, one at 25,000. And most likely those are some limits that were put on by the loan program as far as maximum. And there's some information at the bottom that shows sort of where those came from. At around the 15,000 range, Philadelphia had a number of projects so that were at that range. So it probably had something to do with the way they had their loan program structured. And then out in the 20,000, a number of projects from Portland. And then beyond that, in 25,000, a number of projects from NYSERDA. So that's probably why you're seeing those kind of spikes. We also have, at the very far end, I have included all the information. We didn't actually trim the tails here or try to remove outliers, which would be appropriate. But in this case, I decided to just leave them in. And so we do have a number of projects that are over 30,000 as far as a loan amount, and up to a range, a total of 59. And it's not clear if those are actual, that they're actually correct, or if a project was a multifamily project and it was misreported as single family. There are a number of reasons. It could be completely valid too. So we did leave all of the project in, and we did not remove any outliers. So just a little bit of information there. So I'm going to show you a series of these histograms that show project level information that we have, and to give you some idea of what the data looks like. So here's the same graph. This is a histogram for loan amount. This is just in the Northeast, and in this case, you can see that 15,000. Again, it was really dominated there by Philadelphia, and loan amount goes down a little bit. We also have the Midwest, so some grantees out in the Midwest, and a little lower average loan amount out there. And then the South, it's a little lower than the overall average, and volume as well. And then we have the West, which has quite a few loans, a lot of volume, and a higher average than the rest of the country. And looks like a lot of that probably driven by some projects out in Portland area. So the next question is upgrade invoice cost. So this is for single-family homes. And again, hopefully this is fun. Amanda, I think we have a poll for that too. What is the average invoice cost for a single-family home energy upgrade?
That's right. So we have four options here on your screen: 3,947, 7,027, 8,627, or 10,191. So go ahead and choose your choice and we'll close the poll in just a couple seconds. What do you think is the average invoice cost of a single-family upgrade? Five, four, three, two, one. All right, let's close the poll and we'll see what the results are.
Okay.
All right. We have a strong presence in the $8,000 range, followed closely by the $7,000 and the $10,000 range, and the $3,000, 15%. That's where it fell in. Dale?
Okay, great. Thanks, Amanda. So, what was the average cost? So, again, here you have a histogram, and bins here are around 1,000, similar to the loan amount. And so we're looking at frequency distribution here, number of upgrades with that invoice cost amount that was reported. So there were about 74,680 projects, single family, but only about 65,577 actually had that information. So that's what we have here. Again, we did not remove any outliers, which is definitely, typically done and appropriate, but in this case I decided to leave them in. And so the mean across all of the projects was about 7,027, and the mean about 5,000. So we definitely have a distribution here that's skewed. It's not a normal distribution. And if you look at the 0 to 1,000 range, we had a lot of projects in the state of Michigan where I'm aware that they were offering some packages of projects when they were doing sweeps that were at a fairly low amount in that range, and so that really kind of skews results over in that direction. So we also had a lot in Kansas City and Indianapolis as well in that low range. So so that makes a real difference in the way the distribution looks and the average. So if we just looked at New England or the Northeast, see something a little different. So these are home invoice costs for the Northeast, and the average, or the mean, is a little bit higher. And then the Midwest, of course, there you do see that Michigan, a lot of those projects. It would be interesting to look at this. Didn't take the time to do it, but it would be interesting to look at this and remove those projects from Michigan and see how the rest of the distribution looks. But there, in the Midwest, the average is quite a bit lower from all the rest of the country. And then the Southeast, the mean was around 7,833. Did have a lot of projects in the 3,000, 2 to 3,000 range. They tended to be out in Southeast, Greensboro, and San Antonio. And then out west, distribution looking different, a little bit higher invoice cost out there. But we also did see a lot in the 2,000, 1 to 2,000 invoice cost range coming from Los Angeles County as well as Boulder. So that's just based on what was reported. So one question people ask a lot is how often were projects financed versus, with a loan versus with a homeowner paying. And so based on the information that we have and the loans that were reported, and of course there could be loans that a homeowner used, that a financing that they used that was not part of the program, was not reported, but based on what we have, it's about 15 to 17% or so of the projects were financed. And they did tend to be, of those that were financed, tend to be a higher average cost than what the typically average cost of a typical upgrade. So a little information there about loans versus invoice costs. And again, in this case, we did not remove any outliers, which would definitely be appropriate to do and to to see how that affects the overall results. Okay, a couple more graphs to kind of come to a close here. And one area is estimated annual energy cost savings. So we do have some graphs on that. We do see something interesting here. We see a very big spike over here, and that's actually attributed to a number of projects reported from Maine that were actually had the same the same cost savings. So that's not really that interesting if you're looking at a distribution, but that we can kind of identify where those are coming from. So for this graph, what I wanted to do is I also added a box here with the average annual single-family home energy cost. This is from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey, just as a comparison to what the mean is from this distribution. So it is interesting. We do have quite a few that are at a very high estimated energy cost savings, over 2,500. Very curious about that. Those definitely do look like outliers that would be appropriate to remove. So, but that's just presenting what the data shows us. So we also have this by region of the country. There you can see the Northeast and a lot of those projects in that $300 range from the state of Maine, as well as a couple other, as well as, I think, well, they're primarily the state of Maine, but also some in NYSERDA. And we have the Midwest. So the dynamics change a little bit in the Midwest, and of course the energy costs in the Midwest tend to be a little lower than other parts of the country, at least the Northeast or the South. And then here's the South. We had 9 partners, and then the West, where the energy costs tend to be lower than the rest of the country on average. So the energy costs are a little lower. So the last set of histograms that I'm going to show is just estimated annual energy savings. So this is looking at electricity, natural gas, and other fuels. So what's the average annual estimated savings? So the mean, looking at electricity, kilowatt savings is around 1854. In this graph, we did remove any negative savings, any projects that reported negative savings, and that would happen if there was any kind of fuel switching going on. If somebody actually put in a heat pump and replaced a gas furnace, for example, then you might, negative savings would show up, estimated savings. So for this graph, we did remove those, but we did not remove any other outliers in the graph. And here's another histogram showing natural gas savings, and again, we did remove any negative savings, but otherwise presented the information the way it is reported. And last, we have oil savings, oil and propane savings. For those of you in parts of the country where that's common, we did have some estimates there, and this is in MMBTU. This graph is skewed a lot. There was a number of projects. It's the same savings reported by Maine. So again, looking at a distribution, it's not that interesting. So I did go to the trouble of removing the projects from Maine in this graph in order to kind of see what that distribution looks like. So in this case, it's all the projects that, except for those from the state of Maine. So then looking at the mean there, it's about 37 MMBTU on average for oil or propane savings. So that's my conclusion then on the more detailed information. If you're interested in the report, go to our website, Better Buildings Neighborhood Program website. At the right where it says Learn More on the website, you click there, and then you get to a page where you can download the summary of reported data. So with that, I'll conclude and see if there are any questions.
Okay, thanks, Dale. So folks on the phone, if you would like, feel free to raise your hand or type in a question. While we wait for anyone to type in a question, I also wanted to remind you that we will be posting Dale's presentation along with a recording on the Better Buildings website, so you'll be able to take a closer look at the graph that he just showed us. So, Dale, we have one question about the average energy savings per project. What was it? And can you give a little more context around that?
Okay. The average energy savings per project, or energy cost savings?
Yes.
I can go back to the energy cost savings. This is the estimated energy cost savings. This is what was reported. This is estimated. I'll say a little bit about estimated energy savings. Grantees could use several different approaches or methods to estimate energy savings. Some use deemed savings approaches, some use modeled savings software or some other approach. So the savings that was estimated from grantees was not necessarily done in a consistent way. So that this is what was reported as annual energy cost savings for these projects. And so there is, quite a bit of diversity as far as the approaches or prediction methods used, but this is what was estimated. We do have energy consumption data, and NREL is doing some analysis of that right now, try to better understand actual energy savings. And then there is a final impact evaluation, so they will be looking at doing M&D as well as billing analysis based on the energy consumption data that was reported to validate or verify the energy savings. So this is, what I'm presenting here is just what was reported, estimated energy savings.
Okay.
And I don't know if I answered the question. It was about what was the average. So based on this graph for single-family homes, that box at the right shows the mean is about 559 and the median is about 339. That's energy cost savings. And then if you look at it by region, you will see that energy costs tend to be different in different parts of the country. Obviously, so Midwest, the costs tend to be, the Northeast tend to be higher, and the Midwest tend to be quite a bit lower from what's the average based on the RECS data, Residential Energy Consumption Surveys. Sorry to just use the acronym, but so there is some differences around the country. So looking at average cost savings across the country may not be the best thing to look at because of those actual cost of energy differences. But the other graphs I showed show the actual energy savings, kilowatt hours, therms of gas and oil. So we do have some estimates there as well. I didn't present the graphs, or we haven't actually broken it out by region of the country, but definitely something can be done. We have done some analysis where we looked at total energy savings, so MMBTU, total MMBTU saved, or actually source energy savings. So I didn't, unfortunately, have a graph on that today. But if you're interested in that, it's something I could probably pull together.
Okay, thanks, Dale. We have two more questions, and then we'll wrap up today's webinar. So, Dale, how significant was the drop in MMBTU or cost savings after the 15% requirement was dropped? I don't know. I didn't think we really noticed much.
don't think we noticed much of a change there. I think there were a few grantees who decided to go with what we call the portfolio average approach, and they probably reported some additional projects that may have had a little bit lower savings, but overall, they had projects that were greater than 15% and some that were lower, and not all grantees did that. Some grantees continued to just report projects that were over 15%, or they may have had that as part of the goal in their program. So overall, I didn't think we saw too much of a difference.
Okay. And our last question for today is, can you speak generally about the typical set of measures implemented? It appears to be basic insulation, air sealing, and HVAC upgrades based on the cost profile.
Right now we do have some of that information. We're doing some analysis of what was installed, the installed measure information, and the National Renewable Energy Lab's doing that, and they are going to be presenting some stuff to me in a couple of weeks, I think. So hopefully it will be something that we will be able to share or have them share on a webinar, looking at not only the cost savings, the estimates of prediction or methods of prediction that were used, as well as the installed measure. But yeah, I mean, we did see a lot of air sealing, saw a lot of insulation. I think it's good to be able to break it out, and when the report comes from NREL, I don't want to say too much, but I think looking at that is probably appropriate to look at it regionally, because you are going to see more cooling type improvements in some areas of the country versus maybe in California or the South. You're going to see much more, you're going to see heating improvements in the north, and you're going to see cooling improvements in the south or in California, or more baseload in certain areas. So it probably varies depending upon the region of the country and climate.
Okay. All right. Well, Dale, thank you for today's presentation. And folks, just as a reminder, we'll be posting the presentation and a recording on our website. And we'll also send you an email with a direct link to those files once they're ready. So thank you. With that, we'd like to thank you for joining us today. And this concludes the webcast. Have a good day.